Good morning, everybody. It's Tom Christie back in the painting studio, and this will be session 2 of painting a Ruddy Duck Drake in winter plumage. I do apologize for my voice. I've got cold hanging on, just trying to shake that before Christmas. But in this session, I've got my fan blenders spread out here. I want to talk a little bit about fan blend painting techniques, and then we'll put those to use on the Ruddy Duck Drake. If you're enjoying my channel, please hit the subscribe button. I would appreciate it. It's free, but it is a show of support for what I'm doing here, putting free resources together for people that might want to carve wildfowl, or in this case, duck decoys. All right, let's get going. I'll bring the camera in. Just a quick overview of fan blenders in general. I've got a big collection that I've collected over the many years of carving wildfowl, and I don't use them a lot, but it's nice to have the various sizes. And to me, the trick in fan blending is how you load the brush and get it so that it's going to give you a nice result. It's very easy to get the brush overloaded and the bristles start to gather up, and then you're going to end up with big lines. We want nice, fine. We want to maintain the spread and use the curvature of the fan blender. And I'll show you, hopefully, how I do that. And we'll use different sizes. As we get closer to the breast, we can go to smaller fan blenders. In some of these tight areas up here, I'm going to do a little bit of fan blending up here in this area and a little bit on the cheeks. Or I might use these filberts, which is a rounded tip brush of various sizes. Or we can use, this is called a filbert comb, which I've had these a long time, but the bristles are split a bit and raked out, and that makes a nice feather effect as opposed to just a solid filbert. This puts a little space and splits between the bristles, and that can be very effective. Okay, let's take a look at some fan blending technique. Instead of trying out techniques on the bird I'm going to paint, I'm going to use this old shoveler foam decoy that I've had around a long time, and it's great for this type of purpose. This probably has 20 coats of paint on it from various demonstrations, but I've got this bird textured. I'm going to use white gesso just so it shows up nice here as I'm going through some of the pros and cons of fan blending. And I am by no means an expert on this subject. I'm just going to talk about what I have learned over time, and there may be better ways of doing this. All right, I haven't practiced this, so we'll see what happens. So I'm going to start with this big fan blender. I'm going to wet the brush and put that in the gesso here. That's too wet. If I try to fan blend with that, let me just show you what it's going to look like. I'm not getting any kind of separation between the bristles. It's just blobbing paint on there. As this brush unloads, I'm going to have more success. But you can see I'm still loaded up in the middle. So I've got some decent brush strokes out here, but the middle is just chunked. It's a technical term, not. So let me reload the brush. I'm going to pat it out on a piece of paper towel. Let's try this again. And that's better. And the stroke I'm using is pressing down and then pulling up as you come back. And that is looking better than this here. Let's take a look if we don't get the enough water in the brush. It's kind of this same, too much water, not enough water, we're going to get the same result. The bristles can't spread out evenly like they do here. So it's really tricky, and you can see the other phenomenon. The brush starts to group up groups of bristles. You can see that, I think, in the video. And that's going to start being a problem. So it's kind of a tricky business to maintain a good load in the brush. Now what I did there is loaded the brush and then dabbed it, pulled it a little on the palette here to get the bristles spread out a little bit more. When it's working, it's a great way to simulate feathers. When it's not, it can be very frustrating. So enough on that, but I just wanted to talk about that before we start painting the bird. And loading the brush is key. Getting those splayed out. Same thing with the smaller. Let's just take a look at a very small. One more quick look. A very small brush for these smaller feathers at the breast. That looks pretty decent. And you just have to go until you start to lose paint, and then you need to reload the brush. But you can see that makes quick work of this feathering, and it gives us a nice effect because the splits between the bristles look like splits on a feather. One more quick technique demo. This is that filbert comb brush. This is a 3/8 Royal filbert comb 930, and I've got the brush loaded, and I'm just going to pull in some feather indications with the tip of the brush. You can see it's splayed out, and it's a nice way to put some feathering either on the smaller feathers of the breast or a head like this. It's just another technique you can use to simulate feathering. All right, I want to start at the tail and just checking out a reference photo here. Kind of grayish, dark gray in the middle with reddish brown, kind of rusty edges on these feathers. So we want to portray that in the decor. All right, I've mixed burnt sienna, raw sienna, and a little smoked pearl. And I've got it on a little angled brush here. And I want to use this rather than a detail brush to give a little bit of an edging, a little bit of a softness to this, rather than just a hard line. For the underside of the tail, I'm just going to add some Nimbus Gray to that mix and just pull in some feather edges down here. Again, I'm kind of letting the texture pull paint off of the brush. That's about all we need to do there. I'm going to use carbon black. Just pull in a few quills. These big central feathers. Now I've got white gesso on a fan blender. I'm just going to go over this off-white, pull in a few lighter feather tips. One thing I didn't mention before in the fan blending is you can always go back and hit a feather again and give it a little more emphasis. I'm going to come down the side here and into some of this transition area. Okay, that looks pretty good. I went back with a little Nimbus gray and just with a detail brush and lightened the tips of those tail feathers just so they kind of show from a distance. All right, I have a mixture of raw sienna, raw umber, and smoked pearl. I've got that on a little fan blender, and I want to just pull in a few indications of feathers back here on the rump. Pretty tight quarters back here between the primaries. I mentioned going over things a few times. And that's probably what I'll be doing here. Gradually lightening that area as it wraps into this lighter rump. Now I'm taking some of the original side pocket color and I'm just going to pull in a few across into the light here from the brown just to create a little transition. Now I'm going to use that same light colored mix on the side pockets here. And load up the big fan blender and start down the side pockets here. And if I get a little on the scapular area, we can always go back over that. I'm going back over a few of these as I go. So I'm going to go through the entire bird like this. And we'll go over this kind of multiple times to get a nice mix and lighten the side pocket quite a bit. And I'm really working to keep that fan blender loaded properly. And as I mentioned, that's a challenge. And these feathers are interlocking, so there's not much of a pattern that you can see on these feathers, but they're all kind of laced together. All right, I'll work this for a while and then come back. Moving up to the breast, I'm going to go with a smaller fan blender. You can see the brush wasn't loaded properly. Too much water in that stroke. So you need to go back and take a little paint out of the brush. It's a real balance. So I'll keep working the breast. A little farther along. And as I get up to the neck, I'm just trying to make these smaller and kind of blend in to that gray value of the neck. Some of these random little dots you get, they'll be easy to go back with the darker value and just wipe those out later. So it's not going to be perfect. At least I haven't found it to be. That's another example. If the brush kind of gathers up and leaves too big of a mark, you can always go back and split that with a darker value. A lot of these I'm going back and reinforcing the tip of the feather just to give it a little more of a highlight. And there's another big mark that gathered up on me. I'm using a smaller blender or a fan brush to go into the cape and just put some indications of feathers in the cape. Kind of hard to get behind the head here. Just kind of tie that into the neck value. Now I've got smoked pearl, and I'm just going to lighten the lower areas here. Near the belly. So I'll keep working on that so we get a little lighter value down here underneath. On this bird, I'm going back with a little of the dark original base side pocket color and just breaking up a few of these. If your bird is going to be in competition, you need to check the rules. Sometimes they don't allow any splits in feathers. But since this is going to a collector, I'm not worried about competition rules, and I just want to break those up a bit. And I'm also looking for areas that on the blender that were too heavy on the fan, and just break them up a bit. I'm just taking some of the off-white on a small fan blender and just highlighting the edges of those lower feathers just to give them a little more lightness. Now I've used the chalk pencil to put in my guidelines, and I'm using this same light mix from the side and just outlining the primaries. Little stubby little primaries. And then these come down here. I'm just going to outline those on this bird just to indicate feathers there. Now I've added some raw umber to that mix to darken this because these are pretty subtle, but I want to have some feather tips on here, and I'm using a little angled 1/8 inch scrubber and just doing an outline on each of these. I'm using a scrubber instead of a detail brush just to get a little bit of a softer blend here on these outlines. I want them to be pretty subtle, so I may have to go back and darken these. I'll see. I'm just taking a thin wash of burnt umber and going over the scapulars here just to darken those feather tips a bit, just to make them more subtle. This back is pretty dark on the bird. Now I've got a little burnt umber, raw sienna, and a touch of that smoked pearl to lighten it a bit. And I've got a flat brush without much paint on the brush at all. And I'm just hitting that texture to pop out that peppered look on the back of these birds. Again, not much paint on the brush at all, so that we don't want to deposit too much. But the texture is dragging the paint off the flat brush. And we want a little bit of that reddish color, and that's why the burnt sienna is in there. I've added some of the lighter side pocket edge color to that brush, and I'm just pulling in a little bit of the same effect on the side pocket feathers. There's a subtle little vermiculation look to some of the feathers, so I'm just picking up the highlights, particularly in those dark areas. You can see a little bit of that peppery look on the side pockets as well. Pretty subtle. I hit a few of those feathers with the burnt sienna a little more than the others, just so there's a mottled look to it. And now I've got burnt umber. And I'm just going to put a few splits in to break up these feathers a bit. Again, if you're going into competition, you probably don't want to put splits in these feathers, but it's going to help break these up since this is not a competition bird in the gunning category. About like that. I'm using some of this mix raw umber and gesso, and I put a little more white in it to lighten it up a bit. And I'm using this filbert comb brush just to put a few feather indications in this area and lighten the area up a bit. You can see, again, it's tricky to get these to work consistently. That's more of what I'm going after. I'll have to go back and repair that one. So this will give us a little texture in this area and lighten it up a bit. That's working better now. Sometimes you have to just work with the brush until it unloads a bit. So I'm going to do that to the center line and then do the same thing on the opposite side of the head. I've got white gesso. I'm going to do the same thing in this white cheek patch. just to break it up a bit and give it some depth. I'm doing the same thing with a little raw sienna on the crown to put some feather indications through here with this little comb brush. Not a lot, but just to break it up a bit and make it look more like feathers up there. I'll work on that for a while. I used a little smoked pearl and just put a little eyelid under the eye. And I did a little bit of detail work here just across these junction points just to soften that a bit. Now I want to work on the bill. I've got some gold oxide mixed with a little bit of raw umber and smoked pearl to come up with this kind of flesh tone. And I'm going to scrub that on the lower side of the upper mandible and also on the side of the lower mandible. The reference I'm looking at, again, there's a lot of variation, but there's a little of this peach color, flesh color down there, and also on the nostril enclosure, just very subtle, and a little below it, kind of like that. Take a little burnt umber and just pull in that little detail down below. Using carbon black to darken the nostril. Final touch, I took a little Nimbus gray with cobalt blue and raw umber, created this lighter value of blue and just highlighted the side here on both sides, so a little more of that blue characteristic shows through. I also darkened the nail a bit with burnt umber. Final little detail, just with some burnt umber, I scrubbed in a little darker area here between the nostrils, kind of in that V shape. I used this same value and pulled in some feather quills to the primaries there. Since that tail is right up in the air and visible, I did go ahead and put tips on the feathers and some light feather quills in there. Put a few splits in with burnt umber here. Just a quick look at the finished bird. I sealed it with Tester's Dull Coat and then put Krylon matte finish over that, and then a little Prolux semi-gloss on the bill, and then cover that with the Krylon mat so it's not too shiny. All right, everybody, that's a wrap on the Ruddy Duck Drake in winter plumage. I really like the way he turned out. Had a lot of fun making this bird. I hope this carving series and the painting series will be helpful to you if you should choose to tackle a ruddy. But some of those techniques that I've demonstrated, like the fan blending, you can apply to other birds as well if you're not interested in a ruddy duck. Until next time, Tom Christie signing out. Good carving to you. Merry Christmas.